This is an Avocado Media Network presentation.
The Art.Is.Tic. It's an honor to be here, my brother. Turn me up in the headphones a little bit. You know, there's an old saying. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Well, we done doing nothing. But may the light forever shine on everyone that glow before me. We used to be just dope, not as whiskey soaked in glory.
Chapter 3. It's Roxa. When I first noticed the rapper Chanda Mbao, I instantly became aware of a new type of rapper. Admittedly, I may have been late to the party, but I noticed that artists didn't have to be arrogant towards each other to prove their superiority, and it was getting them so far. Chanda Mbao in particular was working the nice guy image really well. I can never honestly answer you if you ask me whether I became a better person to appeal to a wider audience, or by the time the appeal came, I was enjoying the benefits of being nice. All I can say is we're here, and you're reading this book, and I don't take any part of it for granted. But a long time ago, before I became this nice person, I was the most poisonously bitter person you had ever met. Sometimes I look back at how toxic I was, and I'm shocked that the people around me don't walk around with physical scarring. It was at this time that I hated J-Rocks like a corrupt politician hates a great investigative journalist. I should have figured out early on why I had chosen to hate J-Rocks. If I had even bothered to take a closer peep, I would have seen the familiar scars and walls that were behind his eyes. I would have seen that we were essentially the same person. We were both young men that had been raised by a single parent. To make matters worse, both mothers. We were both the type to put the world in check if the world ever dared to sully our beliefs. We were both young men that had been through the exam of life, and even before they had been given their results, they just knew they had failed badly. It was truly divine destiny that we met in the manner we did. Shortly after my father's death, and to fulfill his death wish, I was studying law in Lusaka City at Evelyn Han campus. This was truly the second time I came to the capital city, but for all intents and purposes, please treat it like my first. This was around the time that my music had given me a small name, and rappers in Lusaka were reaching out for collaborations. One of the rappers that reached out to me was Sam Sakala, now suave actor, but then a humble aspiring rapper named Dope Ghetto, shortened to Dope G. The day we were to meet was doomed from the start. At that time, the death of my father was still a very huge deal to me, and I had not yet dealt with it truly. I had twisted the narrative to fit this young rapper's life, where my father's death would be reported as just another one of those things that inspired me to be a great rapper. That was how far I went not to have to mourn my own father. The day I met Dope G also happened to be my father's memorial, and at that time, being far away from my mother, I didn't know exactly how to deal with it. Before he showed up, I had been sucked into a brooding mood because of all the emotions I was trying to suppress. I have always hated suffering in front of people. He showed up with a kid I would eventually get to know as J-Rocks. J-Rocks features on All Over, off my sophomore album, Art.Is.Tic, but I feel like the journey that got us on a song together is the better one. You are about to enter one half of what I'm convinced was a mirror situation between two kids in a third world country. I've always prided myself in being able to read the energy in a room. When I walk into a room and feel like people have been talking about me, I'm usually right. I've used this energy meter for so long to, among other things, not be there when people say things to hurt me. It was a cowardly one, but it was an escape nonetheless. In contrast to Dope G's bubbly character, J-Rocks was cold and solid. I remember feeling like I was going to have a problem with him the second we met. Whatever I saw in Dope G must have been really appealing because I can't think of any reason I found to keep interacting with the both of them. Without knowing what it was, I was reacting to J-Rocks' pain, and I think he was reacting to mine as well. I remember Dope G did most of the talking. It was almost as though he was a translator, bless his soul. From a distance I stood and silently judged J-Rocks for silently judging me for things I was yet to really deal with. In hindsight, I should have gone for the obvious one first. We both lacked an active father figure. Even before his death, my father and I had a tumultuous relationship. I say this to make you realize how complicated our relationship became after his death, as well as before it. It is only recently, as I stepped out from under the shade of childhood, that I have seen just how extreme the son can be to an African parent. Especially an African parent that until recently had been part of the liberation struggle for his country. I should have realized then that the father that I had wanted had died one of those many times he had thought he had escaped death. This knowledge makes me rest easier at night, and I feel like it's okay to admit that. I watched for many years the frustrations of a man that was ill-equipped to raise a child become frustrated at the very same child's inability to raise itself. And in a sick and twisted way that only a son can, I understand his side of the story. I can understand the absurdity we showed in expecting this man, who had been a soldier for a liberation army, to be a good father as well. That was clearly too much to ask from him. Someone once told me a story about how the white man castrated Robert Mugabe in an effort to stop him forever because he would not be able to reproduce children with his type of dreams already interwoven into their being. If there ever was a deliberate move to stop me from succeeding, I can totally understand why. It was my father. The freedom gene that he had handed down to me is so strong that it hurts me to see anyone's freedom being trampled on. Now imagine taking away the physical representation of all that from an impressionable young man with small city dreams. I once spat on a girl in a club. Because of the amount of alcohol I had taken, I can never truly remember how our interaction reached that extent, but before I knew it, I had decided to spit half of the beer that was in my mouth in her face. This was me before the great success of Vitumbua, so you can only imagine what such a mentality spiraled into shortly after. It is in such moments that you can see how much my father's death had impacted me. To the world, I was being a really cool kid, but deep down inside, I could see the gaping hole my hero's death had left in my soul. During an online comment war on Facebook, I threw the match that finally ignited the fire. 2-1, who I was affiliated to, had been growing increasingly irritable due to the fact that our efforts were seemingly not being noticed, and we had no means of dealing with this, apart from targeting another rap collective. Due to the fact that members of both camps hung around each other, information was being exchanged in a manner that, in the beginning, seemed harmless. What we didn't count on was our egos collectively clashing at the same time before Duncan Sadala, who we mutually respected and the only person we would have both listened to, could stop it. Words were exchanged on social media. Friendships were broken and alliances were forged. The line had been drawn in the sand. The beauty in this situation, however, was the smaller but more personal war that was going on between J-Rocks and I. In a crowd of brawling youths and egos, I had my eyes locked on the one guy I had been wanting to take a swing on. For the next few moments, I may be labeled a snitch for revealing what I'm about to reveal, but at the age of 30, I could really care less about your half-baked opinions on things that you can barely understand. The people involved know me well enough to realize none of this was ever revealed with the motive of any harm being done to their character. It's all love. Our feud with Zone Fam was interesting, because a group of boys that were otherwise friends stopped talking to each other because of a smaller subgroup within them that had the real problem with one another. From being two groups that got along, I found myself participating in jokes about how J-Rocks' accent was too terrible for him to be a rapper, and tried to convince myself I was okay with how I felt about that. For some reason, at this time, Crisis also had a problem with Zone Fam via a totally different power dynamic in his camp. Dam and Chain had recently added new members to their ranks, and they now comprised of people that had hung around at the same house parties as Zone Fam and us. And also, in a deeper twist of fate, there was the playground-themed fact that we really just hated them because girls liked them. For me at least, it was that way. It wasn't long before we were in a studio with Crisis and someone came up with the idea to crush them on a diss record. At that time we were studio hopping, and one could blame our suspension of morals on our need to sate our talent's needs, but the truth is I personally just wanted to hurt J-Rocks because he seemed to be getting more famous than me. I was plagued by this particular strain of jealousy for such a long time, it would amaze you. This is the same type of jealousy I have had to swallow each and every time I have watched people I believed were my enemies make progress. On the night that our performance at the Born and Bred Awards was interrupted by a power outage, I got to sit and watch Zone Fam win countless awards. I also got to watch Zone Fam win a Channel O award in front of the whole Africa from the comfort of the Ground Zero offices. Ground Zero, more particularly Kenny Rock, were important to me for reasons that make that last bit of information more potent. And that is the story of how we recorded Diamond Chainsaw, a diss song to Zone Fam that was so ahead of its time that we managed to dupe one of their members to be on it unknowingly. Just before the diss song was released, however, some level heads in our collective got control of the situation and called for a sit-down. It was at this point that some of my teammates got off the bandwagon of hate for Zone Fam. I tried to as well, in all honesty, but the amount of hate I had planted inside myself for J-Rocks was too potent. So I continued my journey alone, hoping at every turn that J-Rocks would stumble and fall in front of everybody. Not only did Zone Fam go on to achieve amazing things, but so did J-Rocks in his solo venture. At the end of it all, he walked away with a beautiful wife and children. All I had were memories of my failure while my enemies were winning all around me. This was the place from which I began to rebuild all my friendships, but most notably my friendship with J-Rocks. Before we got to speak about all the pain we had been through, I decided to request for a feature from him. The promptness with which he returned the chorus for the song All Over convinced me he was going through the same changes that I was going through. It was ironic that we had gone through separate paths only to end up at the same point again. Through odd conversation behind the scenes of performances we had both been booked for, I got to meet J-Rocks all over again. Before I sat down to write this book, we had last met at All Out for Our Own, a concert that had thrown us in front of a total of 14,000 people in an unprecedented form of solidarity from local music fans. We had spoken about how he was working on the type of art that would change the world for the next generation. This tall as me, skinny as me, dreadlock kid I met at Evelyn Hahn had grown. Can you see why I chose to tell you about the journey, and not the moment that led to the creation of the song All Over?
The Art.Is.Tic. It's an honor to be here, my brother. Turn me up in the headphones a little bit. You know, there's an old saying: all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Well, we done doing nothing.
Made a light forever shine on everyone that glowed before me. We used to be just dope, now this whiskey soaked in glory. They made us Harley Quinns, we opened up for jokers. Stole this league from the shadows, now they kneel when they approach us. Even before you sit, these suckers who dethrone you, son.
Explore the world of psychological thriller within you. From the makers of the Pan-African Party comes a gripping, chilling journey. Coming soon to the Avocado Media Network. Subscribe on YouTube and pay